The two travelers stopped in a small town along their route. As they went, the cleric was amazed at all she saw. This place was nothing like her village, least of all due to the caravan. Merchants from a dozen lands had gathered to trade their wares and buy others to bring home. A dozen languages were spoken as she marveled at the strange assortment of races before her. Even Adam was taken back by a few. Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. Today, I want to look at what are the requirements for being a sentient race, and which type of animals being the most common. What does it mean to be sentient? By definition, able to feel or perceive things. And that is completely useless. What about sapient? Wise, or attempting to appear wise. Again, there is an issue with what wise means. So my criteria would be being able to prepare multi-step plans, discuss topics while absent, learn and apply information, and possessing an independent culture, including art and music. Does that sound better? As to what each part means. The first is multi-step plans. This is required for construction of shelters, planting, and maintaining fields and orchards. It would be invaluable if you seek to build cities. There are a dozen small facets which need to be addressed. Housing, food and waste management, getting iron, wood, stone, and other resources to complete construction, organizing labor and workers. As to the second one, discussing things which aren't present or abstract. How do you discuss time? Or concepts like honor and humility? Why do I consider these important? These are the concepts which can help bind a society, bring motivation and guidance, ideas which we strive for. It is also important for discussing people who are elsewhere, such as another city, nation, and so on. Learning and applying is important. Take the concept of a steam engine. What would it take to make a jump from boiling water to moving something great distances just by looking at the two? This is how things like paper and smelting iron has come about. True intelligence isn't the ability to regurgitate information, but the ability to apply it. Through this, technology can improve. Go from a simple wooden stick to a club to an axe. Incremental increases, which lets you take a bit of dirt and refine it into metal by heating it. And that brings us to my last point. Possessing a culture which includes things like art and music. Now, here is the fundamental truth about music. It is ultimately completely useless. You can't eat it. You can't wear it. You can't do anything practical with music. So why is it so important? Because it isn't. I am not talking in circles, but it tells us a few things. 1. They have excess resources and time to spend on leisure activities. This includes games, jokes, and stories. In each, they reflect the values and feelings that a people hold. Okay, so what will it take to develop these? The first issue is accumulated knowledge. This is information which passes from one generation to the next, and what is lost with each. Humans are believed to have existed for at least 300,000 years, but known human culture only began 10 to 6,000 years ago. So most of human history is lost. When did humans learn to write and read? At least 6,000 years ago. What about metallurgy? Well, that was up to 10,000 years ago. So there is much that has been lost. How they did it was through the process we touched on earlier. Something learned by one generation is passed on to the next, and we find out what isn't important, and that will change by the generation. 100 years ago, most people knew how to farm, but today, that is becoming a more limited skill set. And to pass on information, we will need the different generations to meet and interact. The easiest way to do this is for the parents to take care of their children. This means having children which are dependent after birth. Yes, in this case, having babies be defenseless will help the passing of information on. This is what we see with humans, isn't it? A child is pretty much worthless for a couple of years, and their full mental functions take about 20 years to form. This dependency on parents also leads to social interactions, which is critical. And this is why I believe sexually reproducing species will have the advantage. To mate, they have to partake in some form of social interactions, while asexually reproducing species don't, which makes operating as a whole much harder. They would be less able to put their own desires aside for the greater good. So, which animals fit this? Primates are a quick answer. I mean, humans are primates, so it's a no-brainer. They live in troops and bands with social hierarchies, and their young need a lot of care. Not as long as humans, but it still works. After primates, we can look at other mammals like canines and felines. Both have packs and prides that they operate in. Their young don't require quite as much care, but there is a major difference in their ability to learn and think, and this is for a reason. Humans have a proportionately larger cerebral cortex when compared to other animals. As you can see from these images, the size differences we are dealing with. The cerebral cortex is what you think of most of the time when you're talking about a brain. Most of the body's regulations is in the brain stem and cerebellum. The cerebral cortex has the different lobes and functions on memory and learning. So if canines and felines could grow a larger cerebral cortex, they could become a sentient race. Other mammals would be the same to varying degrees. Birds are interesting. They have flocks, and those do require social interactions, but are very different than human societies. While they do have a hierarchy, it is very fluid. It can change very quickly just because they are moving about, and they get complex. They also build nests, a seasonal structure which requires the gathering of resources and construction, and they can adapt to handle various predators with location and shape. Not to mention, they have complex songs. Overall, making a bird sentient would be very easy. If I had to pick a group of birds, it would be either corvids like ravens and crows, or the more linguistic psittaciforms like parrots. Which is more likely is a toss-up. I'd say the corvids, for the problem solving. Mind you, the parrot's ability to learn language and sound and give them meaning isn't a joke. But then we look at reptiles. They build nests and maintain them, but after birth, their care is limited. A few do offer some parental investment, but it is limited. A couple of weeks at most. They also have very limited mental faculties. They don't learn much, and no signs of tool use. Digging a pit or piling leaves isn't even close to a bird's nest. So, they would be unlikely. If they did, their frontal cortex would need an excessive amount of improvement. And the odds get even worse for fish. Many die after laying their eggs, which means there is absolutely no chance of accumulated knowledge being passed on. On the invertebrate front, things are different. You may think octopi and squids would be great candidates. I mean, they're definitely smart enough to learn. That isn't even a question. But the problem comes from the complete lack of parental investment. They will tend to their eggs, and that's it. The newborns are on their own. So, in order for an octopus race to exist, we need to have them care for their broods. Potentially, smaller broods would encourage it. Other invertebrates are even worse. Most don't even stay around after they lay their eggs, except for the Hymenoptera, eusocial insects like ants and bees, and some spiders, but they are limited and very different. For bees and ants, social interactions are their forte. Their colonies can put human cities to shame. There are even ants which can farm fungus and collect leaves to feed it. They are nearly perfect, a little lacking on individual intelligence and lifespan, but definitely viable. I want to touch on a colony-based species. Now we are dealing with a more abstract race. A hive mind would be a radical difference. It isn't about individuals, but the whole. So long as the whole adult population isn't wiped out, they can retain knowledge. They can retain knowledge with limited parental care. If only one member survives, they aren't gone. But what about a species based on something like coral or manowars? They aren't a single life form, but a large group operating as a single individual. Each individual would not need to be intelligent, which is a big change, but plausible? If so, it would probably be a race which is quickest to work with others, one that thinks about the greater good over themselves. It is a weird sort of creature, which the real world would never produce, I believe. There is one more factor to address: lifespan. Longer lifespans provide more time to accumulate knowledge. That means a more complex society is very likely to burst forth. This is probably why elves are a dominant race in so many series. Can you imagine what our society would be like if our greatest inventors were able to live for another century? How well can a person master their craft? But here is the big thing with a long life. They can gain mastery in multiple fields. Where did metallurgy come from? They needed a way to bring the temperature up high enough, knew what the metal ore was, and could make the attempts until they figured out smelting. For an invention to be brought forth, you need a few things. People with knowledge of the underlying principles, which constructs to the invention. Access to the resources, which can come with time, and the idea. A long enough lived species makes it much more likely that such events happen. And this brings up one of the craziest things possible. What if you had a race that lived nearly indefinitely, was asexual, and had no need to interact with its own? Here is the thing. Conceptually, such a race could exist. They would probably have no culture or a unifying force amongst their kind. Each would very likely be out for their own. But what about plants and fungi races? Well, they don't meet any of the necessary criteria, which means that they will be the least likely. But hey, we are talking about fantasy races, so what's wrong with creating a species of treefolk or fungi? Adam smiled and laughed at Clara's fascination. She spoke with a creature which he couldn't even guess what it was. She parted with a couple of coins, but got a bracelet. He admired how it looked on her. Gorgeous. There are a lot of factors which influence whether a species could become sentient, but it can create some fascinating races to fill a world. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time for Impundulu. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.